So last time I tried to make an iOS app, I gave up after like a week. I guess I'm a one-trick Python pony. But recently, everyone's been talking about these AI code editors, and apparently, shit's so easy that even 8-year-olds can build web apps now. And there are tutorials on how to build an app with cursor under 60 minutes, under 20 minutes, under 8 minutes, under 2 minutes. Okay, that's a bit sus. But honestly, when you look at some of these, it's like, bro, your app is like one API call. I was like, is this all hype? I gotta find out for myself. So the question is, using an AI editor like Cursor, can I actually build a prototype of the app that I want without learning any Swift UI? It turned out that you can't. Yeah, you actually have to learn it. But the cool thing is, you really only need to learn like the main concepts, and you don't have to worry about the mechanics as much. Okay, that sounded like pseudo profound bullshit. So, anyways, I decided to use Cursor to build an iOS app, and this is how it went. So the app that I wanted to build is like an flashcards app to help dancers learn new dance moves in salsa, bachata. I know it's a bit random, but anyways, as an experienced code monkey, my first step was to write a spec. To stay on brand, of course, I used the LLM to generate it, lolcats. Okay, so here's the prompt. Basically act as an expert PM. Let's come up with a new app called Learn a Move, where users can add, track, and manage dance moves they found on social media. I used Llama 3 for this, and this is what it spat out. So basically give us like the core views that we need to implement to be able to like list moves, to be able to see what the details are, and to be able to track like the progress and then like practice sessions. So overall, pretty good place to start. And to refine the doc, I basically just asked it to critique the doc as an expert software architect or as a PM, and then just do this like a few times. So here are some the specific feedback that we got back, and here are some like the more general stuff. And in my experience, like 20% of the suggestions are actually pretty good. So for example, the data model here, that's like a good idea. So I will add these to the doc and then feed it back to the LLM again. And once it's pretty solid, I went ahead and asked it to come up with like implementation phases in order to group our features that we need to build out. And the results like looks pretty reasonable. Like phase one, we get the core like movement management stuff. And then the phase two is like the bells and whistles. And then the third phase is like more fancy stuff. Now that we got a plan, let's get Cursor to write some code for us. Okay, so I got Cursor set up here and I'm in the composer mode. And here I'm just asking it to analyze the product requirements and then implement phase one in swiftUI. Man, look at it go. Okay, so phase one involves building the core components so that the user can add a new move and see the details of each move that they've added. Cool. Yeah, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend I know Swift, but I mean, it looks kind of reasonable. Okay, let's try to compile this and see if it works. Oh shit, it actually built. Let's see. So you can actually see the details. Here we have some sample data. And then we can create a new move, save it, and it actually shows up. Nice. I was pretty surprised at this point. No compilation errors? That was unexpected. Well, phase one worked so well. Let's try phase two now. You know, we're 1/3 way to our prototype. Okay, so back in Cursor, we're in the composer mode, and this time we want to actually pass in the code base here so that it can work off of what's already been built instead of trying to create new stuff. And then otherwise the same, so we analyze the product requirements and then implement phase two. while this is running, so for example, you see here, we've already created the move.swift before, but now if you look at the diff, it's actually modifying it to include new fields that we want to have for phase 2. Yeah, and that's a lot of new stuff. All right, cool. Looks like it's done. YOLO, let's see if it works. All right, let's see what happens. Womp womp. Cannot convert value of type move to expected argument. All right, let's paste in there and see if we fix it. Okay. Wow, so it actually just works. Let's see, so let's try editing it. Let's call it 2. Nice. We have a focus view that shows the same thing. So we can toggle it to focus or not. Let's see. Yep, that's working. And then we can log practices. Cool. Okay, so while this looks like it's working, it's actually missing pretty critical features. For example, data persistence. So right now, if I exit the app and I come back to it, my change is gone, which is pretty bad. So yeah, let's try to change this. Okay. Oof. Okay, so basically our goal is to pre-populate some sample data, and this turned out not to be so simple. To do that, we need to implement like data storage for the app, which it currently does not have. So then, since I don't really know anything, here are, I just kind of asked like, okay, what are the different approaches to doing data persistence in iOS? So kind of looking through this, user defaults is kind of out because it might work for this instance, but we still need to do data storage later on. And then this one, I think just like small files, a small amount of data, so we don't really want that. It kind of came down to like core data versus SQLite, because like the other suggestions like Realm or like Firebase require like external dependencies that I didn't really want to touch for now. So then looking at SQLite and core data, SQLite, that's something I'm a lot more familiar with. So that's where I started. But then, asking Cursor to do the, like build it out in SQLite, that kind of got stuck in a loop of basically, you see these errors of like inserting into the thing and then there's no values. I'll feed it back into Cursor to kind of have it like try to come up with something else, but it would just get stuck in this loop. And later on, I think it's something to do probably with the enums that some like data is using, which SQLite is like doesn't support that. So then we had to do some conversion, which Cursor like didn't realize like that was the issue. So then after this, I moved on to trying with core data. For that, we have this sort of weird structure of like, we started the core data with this like learn and move, like our data model, but then Cursor like would suggest to create another move class, which then kind of overlaps it. So you have the error here of like, redecoration of move. It was kind of hard to get out of this also, not knowing too much about iOS, because Cursor wasn't aware of this like learn and move XC data, even if you kind of pass in the code base as context. Well, so after both of these got stuck, I tried to look around and realize, oh, there's actually like a more modern package called swiftData. So then I started trying that, but then it started okay. And then once it starts, showing error, I will ask Cursor for a fix. But that just kind of resulted in more code and then new errors and then more code and new errors. So got stuck in this really bad loop. So after going in circles for like an hour or two, I was like, man, this wasn't getting anywhere. That's when I realized I've been kind of doing this all wrong. Because my goal was to build an app fast, but what that really meant was like getting Cursor to build an app without me actually having to learn anything. And because I didn't actually learn anything, well, when I got stuck because Cursor would make a mistake or wasn't fully aware of like what I wanted, like it's, no shit, I got stuck because I don't know anything and I couldn't really get myself out of it. So that's when I kind of realized like, okay, the goal should actually be to get Cursor to help me learn how to build an app and do a lot of the groundwork, but I need to be in charge and actually know sort of at least at a high level, like what's going on. So basically at this point, I just deleted the repo and started from scratch. And this time, I'm actually going to use Cursor to help me learn swiftUI instead of just writing code for me. So the first thing I did was to break down the implementation phases. So remember last time we had, 3 phases, and then we just asked Cursor to just implement like entire phase 1. So the issue was like, like all at the same time, like 8 new files were getting created. So it's really overwhelming to kind of track and try to learn like, okay, what's happening. So then instead of that, like I've asked it to like break it down, the phase 1 into like these individual steps with things that, ideally we can kind of validate like at the end of each step. And the second thing that turned out to be really helpful is to use GitHub issues to actually track these the implementation of these different steps. So for example, here, like the step 1.4 is like to create like this new move view. So I will kind of list out like, hey, what's the like, what do we need to do here? And then what's the prompt I'm feeding it into the into Cursor, and then kind of writing down notes of some of the issues I'm seeing as like I'm iterating on it. And also just recording like, stuff that I've learned. So here, for example, like this dismiss keyword, like I haven't seen that before. So then I actually took the time to like, okay, let's go learn like what this thing actually does. And it's pretty fast, but now I know like, oh, like this is how that works, instead of just like, relying on whatever it gave us. So yeah, and this like turned out to be much better. Sure, it's not, instead of taking like 3 minutes to write out the entire thing, now, it took me like 2 hours, right, to kind of do phase 1. But as a result of that, right, like I'm actually learning how these different things work. And I'm like checking each step along the way to make sure it's actually what I want. So yeah, and following this approach, I was able to like get like a functional prototype kind of working here. So for example, like you can actually do more sophisticated things like having YouTube embeddings, and you can actually even upload your videos from the camera roll. So yeah, it speeds up the development process like so much faster than, if like I didn't use Cursor. But if I purely relied on it, I think it's still a clown fiesta. Wow, you're still here? Thanks. So speaking of building apps with LLMs, getting responses back in valid JSON from the model can be a bit of a struggle bus. So check out this video where I look at the 3 levels of getting LLMs to output valid JSON without threats of violence. Bye.